Hi Ian, so thank you very much for joining us. Now, I know that you're known as Herr Doctor, so if you'd like to sort of give us some background as to where that name came from, please.
Oh, crikey. Well, it's an old story now because it dates back to when does it date back to now? 2000, February of 2007, I think it was, which was when a very old work colleague and friend of mine nudged me out of the blue via email and said, "Oh, there's this fantastic blog and forum called Brass Goggles. It's right up your street." Because he'd always said that he used to go off and do Victorian LARP, and while I didn't, and he'd always complained that I had more Victorian clobber than he did. So I went, "Yep, steampunk, if that's what it is, sounds right up my street." Went and had a look. I think I joined the forum on its second day. I went,
Okay.
"Haha! I'll use my favourite nom de internet, and I shall type in the Doctor already registered." And I was like, "Oh, so some rotter's already taken my usual name. In that case, I shall register as Herr Doktor," which also I had to learn how to do umlauts on a keyboard. Which for those of you who are interested, to get an umlaut over a lowercase o, you press Alt, and then on the keypad you type 148, because I wanted it to look a little bit different, so I put the umlaut in, which subsequently caused a few German speakers, a few francophones, to buttonhole me and say, "Of course, you realize in German it makes the O into a long vowel sound, which would make you Herr Doktor." And I've always said it's a heavy metal umlaut, and they've gone, "Ah, that makes perfect sense." But yes, basically I came up with the name Herr Doktor because somebody already had the Doctor, and subsequently it's turned out to be quite original. There's not many other Herr Doctors out there, especially not with the heavy metal umlaut. So that's how I became Herr Doctor. But in a way, I think I've always been Herr Doctor because I've always loved the Victorian style.
Yeah.
I've always liked, anachronistic things. Partly because of the Doctor thing, because I'm a big Doctor Who fan. Time travel.
Well, I was going to say to you is obviously, you mentioned you were already interested, but when did your interest in sort of steampunk or Victoriana or science fiction in general, when did that start?
Well, I'm going to have to go back to Doctor Who with that because I've said
It's a good
my
place
life.
to start.
Everybody knows what you're talking about.
Yeah.
As a child, I used to sit and watch films with my mum and dad. My dad would watch westerns and war films, so I'm quite up to speed on that genre. My mum liked horrors and science fiction, and where they crossed over was they both liked musicals. So I'm something of a Renaissance man in that respect. So yes, and my mum literally some of my very earliest memories as a child are of episodes of Doctor Who. I mean, never mind remembering, anything of great import. It's John Pertwee falling out of the TARDIS, and my mum explained to me he's not feeling very well because he's just changed his face. He does that now and then, which was great. A few years later, when all the kids in the playground were going, "Oh, did you see Doctor Who's changed his face? Oh, I've not seen that before." I'm going, "No, he does that. Yeah, I know all about that. He does that. He'll do it again." So yeah, it was literally having quite a healthy interest in fantasy and fiction, because my parents were both big readers, and when I learned to read, it went like this: "Let's try and get Ian to read before he gets to school." Flashcards and everything, and me going, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you're doing. And then my mum took me to a school fete before I started school, and I found a Basil Brush book, and I said, "Oh, I love Basil Brush." And so I paid my 2p, took the book home. My mum said, "Oh, you look at the pictures in bed. I'll bring you some warm milk and I'll read the story to you." And she came up and she said, "Have you looked at the pictures?" I said, "No, I've read it." And she went, "You've made up a story with the pictures." I said, "No, I've read it." And she said, "Show me." So I went, "Basil Brush wanted to go to the seaside." And she went, how are you able to read this when you haven't been able to read anything else?" And the answer was, no one had actually given me anything I wanted to read. So when I found a book I did want to read, I learned to read.
It does make a big difference, though, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, if you give something, yeah, one of the great motivators is getting people to want to do things rather than making them do things. And after that, I read every book I could find. I went from a reading age of about 3 when I was, well, that'd been about 4.5, 5, to a reading age of about 8 in about a month, with the teachers all going, Yeah, it was literally that nobody had given me anything I wanted to read up until that point. Once I learnt how much fun it was, I read everything. Which is, I think that's I think that's one of the things that sort of informs my literacy, if you like, in steampunk, is because I've read everything I can get my hands on.
No, well, that's really good. I mean, the thing is, like I said, I had some questions for you. One of the questions I wasn't, but you've already mentioned it, is you do have a reputation for finding interesting items in second-hand shops and things like that. And it's you're kind of like the envy of a lot of the other people on the various sides. So obviously that started young now, from what you just said.
Yes. My parents would probably tell you if they were here. Well, one that's slightly more difficult than the other, but if my mother was here, she'd tell you that as a kid, I would wait looking out the, tweaking the curtains on dustbin day when the bin men came round, because I was absolutely fascinated with everything that people threw out. And I'd quite often come home with rubbish. If I went out for a ramble, I'd find things and bring them home because they looked interesting.
Yeah.
Everybody does that with interesting looking stones and seashells at the seaside, but for me it was like, oh, look, I found this timer switch from out of I don't know where it's from, and it turned out somebody had broken into a street lamp. It was one of those mechanical timer switches.
Okay, yeah.
Beautiful thing. I mean, if you want something that looks right on the cusp of steampunk and diesel punk, the mechanical electrical time switches that used to be in every street lamp in the country are gorgeous, and they tick. You used to be able to put your head down next to a lamppost and hear it going tick, tick, tick. I used to imagine it was a time bomb, but it turned out to be nothing quite so interesting. Nothing ever blew up.
But again, it's very steampunk to go out, like you say, people might collect stones. I think steampunk's always out. If you're out, you just see something interesting, a shape or something. It's like, yeah, that could be useful. So obviously that started young, so that's good.
Oh yeah.
So obviously it's been strange times. There's no asylum this year. So with the lockdown, how have you found it in general, the lockdown?
Well, it's a difficult thing to say, but I've kind of enjoyed it.
Okay.
I've been, well, certainly for the first 3 months, because I'm sort of back doing the day job now in a limited form, because I make exhibits for museums and exhibitions, and as they're all beginning to cycle up to open again, there's more work now. But yeah, certainly for the first 3 months where I was, stuck within these four walls, it was like, well, I've got plenty of projects to be getting on with. We've had visitors actually comment. Had Miss Emily Ladybird, who's a steampunk designer and dressmaker. She came down and stayed with us for a few days several years ago, and she said, well, if there was a zombie apocalypse, this would be the good place to stay, because there's weapons on every wall and there's so much else to do. And it's like, yes, that came in very handy in that 3-month lockdown. We certainly weren't bored.
That's good. That's good. So is there one piece, something you've made during the lockdown that you're especially sort of proud of, or you're working on now, or something like that?
Well, just before the lockdown occurred, Professor Elemental was running his Nemesis competition, whereby he would find his nemesis, and I bent the ear of Tom Brown of Hopeless Maine fame,
yeah,
and asked him if he would mind doing an illustration of me as a villain, because Professor Elemental's bag is very much hip hop and comics. So if I got a comic illustrator with whom Professor Elemental has worked before to do an illustration of me, which he kindly did, and he also added another character into the picture, which is a floating minion, a floating robot minion next to me. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, well, in that case, I'd better make one then. And I made quite a good start. I think you can just about see the floating minion there. There was a video I did for the previous online steampunk event, which Rostov organised, where I had a little bit of a video on there which showed the making of it in a little bit more detail. But I think that's probably the biggest steampunk thing I've done during the lockdown.
No,
but being fairly full in the knowledge that all the events I was probably going to this year would be cancelled. I haven't done as much in the steampunk and diesel punk sort of world as I might have done other years, because it's like I'm not going to have a chance to show anybody anything.
Yeah, I know. I understand the sort of theory behind it. It's easy to sort of start stuff and not finish it when all this is going on.
Well, yes, there's a meme been going around Facebook about always having 2 projects on the go, because then when you're bored with one, you can start with the other.
Yeah.
And I quit. Oh, that's hopelessly optimistic. And good old Andy Arbon sent me a link to what he had put on his page, which was a list of about 18 different projects you could have on the go.
Yeah.
And it's like, that is far more realistic. So I think currently I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, probably got 6 that I can think of. Maybe 7, possibly 8, could be 9, might be 10. Yeah.
I get it.
Yes. I suspect I'm like you. It's that butterfly mind thing of you'll alight on something. Oh, that's a good idea. Make a start on it and go, oh, but this is also a good idea, and you just shuffle around. I mean,
I think that's the general sort of mindset of a lot of the steampunk makers, but it's kind of even worse when you haven't got a deadline with no like conventions or something. It's even easier to that sort of mindset.
Yes. Well, the asylum every year is very much like a gun getting closer and closer to your head, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's always is, you know, you kind of, my feeling is you've always got to it's kind of disappointing for me, let alone anybody else, when I turn up an event and there's nothing new to show anybody.
Yeah.
So it's always good to have, and like I say, the asylum is sort of a double whammy. It's not only just having something to put in the great exhibition or put on display or talk about. It's also, you've got to dress up for it as well.
Yeah.
So at least one of my projects is partly for a costume as well. On the way back from the previous asylum, there's a lovely little village called Horncastle, which is jam-packed with antique shops. And I went into one of the antique shops and found this, which immediately made me think of Ghostbusters. It's a 1950s ammeter, and I was like, oh, Ghostbusters. I thought, diesel punk Ghostbusters. Plenty of steampunk Ghostbusters, but I don't think I've seen a diesel punk one. Maybe oh, Art Deco Ghostbusters pack, which I've sort of got on the go. I've got a bit of it here. I've got the wand here, which is
okay, that's excellent.
It's getting there. It's getting there. It's basically I'm sort of stumbling on the electronics at the moment. I need to meet up with someone that knows their way around an Arduino better than I do. But the genesis of this was in the workshop I work in. They were having a big clear out, and there was this drill, which is this section here. It's a 1924 Black & Decker drill, and I basically saw that sitting by the bin and went, "That's my neutrino wand. That's the start of a neutrino wand right there." And it was like, well, when fate hands you these things, you kind of have to grab them, don't you?
Absolutely.
I've got the rest of the pack there. It's in grey primer, so I'm hopefully within the next few weeks I will be getting a coat of paint on that. But if I'm happy enough with it, I might well bring it along to Sanctuary.
Well, I was going to say, there's lots of for people to look at, and sort of in a few months or whenever the events start up again, they can say, "Oh yeah, I saw that in the process," and then they'll be able to see the finished product. So that's really good. So, Ian, thank you very much for doing the interview for us. And
that's all right. You're welcome.
To Sanctuary, and we'll see you then. We'll get to meet up at some of the conventions in future as well. So, thank you for that.
That's all right. It's been an absolute joy speaking to you, my old friend, and I hope, look forward to seeing you and everybody else.